to our CPS web tips for Winshuttle. I am your host today, and my name is Tom Dempsey, and we're just going to go over some preliminary stuff before we start. Everybody will be muted. If there's any polls, you'll see the polls as they come up. And if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and type your questions in the chat. And at the end, I will help answer those questions to the best I can. A little bit about me. My name's Tom Dempsey. I've been with CPS for over 4.5 years. I've been working with forms and workflows for over 9 years. Started off with SharePoint Designer workflows to Nintex to Winshuttle to AgilePoint, so on and so forth. Today's topics is for Composer tips and tricks, where we'll be going over a data connection library, name templates, and the rule inspector. And to start things off, we're going to be going over the data connection library. So the data connection library, it allows you to share data connections that you've created and configured with other solutions. And to start this demo off, where you find it is when you open up your Composer, you'll see in the top right, Edit Data Connection Library. And when you click on that, it's going to open up a prompt, and you're going to see if there have been already created data connections here. You'll see them listed here. And what this does is it allows you to share data connections throughout solutions. So this is fairly useful at an enterprise level. If you are sharing multiple lists or SQL databases amongst your solutions, you can store your data connections here to easily make them accessible for other solutions. That helps to streamline process for that. And it can also help organize data connections that are required, that may be required for different solutions, and they all can be compacted here. And the next step is how do we create data connections to be stored in here? So right now on my WEBtips home foundation site, you'll see that I've created some lists here. We have countries, service reps, and US states. Now going back to Composer, you'll see that I've already added countries and US states. However, if I want to add a new one, this is the process. So we're going to click on Create here. And here you can provide a name for the name of the data connection. And for this, we're going to call it Service Reps. And the scope. So the scope is pretty significant. Where do you want this to reside for other users to make it more accessible? Do you want it to be on this specific SharePoint site? Do you want it to be on the site collection? Or do you want it to be accessible on the SharePoint farm? So you've got some options on where you want to store this data connection at. For this example, we're just going to use the SharePoint site. You can give it a description if you like, and then we're going to choose, and then the normal process of adding a data connection is the same process. So we're going to choose our URL, which is my WEBtips site. Then I'm going to select my service reps. And then you can add your sort fields if you like to. So I've added the name, the scope to where I want to save this data connection to, and the type of data connection that we're going to add. So once I click Save here, you'll notice that the data connection service reps has been saved to the library. And if I click off, you'll see that service reps is now accessible here. Other options you have is if you want to edit that data connection, you can still do that here by clicking Edit. It gives you the same options as if you want to change or add fields. Where used, if you want to understand where that data connection is being used, you can select on where used. Then the next step is adding to the solution, which we'll get into in a second. And then if you want to copy data connections, you can do that as well. So before we add the data connections, let's take a look at my form. It's a very basic form, but I have countries, states, and service reps. All three of them are drop downs. And looking at the properties, I have nothing set up for this. So I need to add some data connections for these dropdowns. So the manual way of doing this before is you right click on data connection and add a data connection and go through this step. Now using this data connection library, I can go and say, I want to add US states. And then by simply clicking add a solution, it's almost instantaneously, this data connection has been added to the solution. So if I click off, click OK, you'll notice that US states has been added as a data connection. And now if I go back to my form, I click on states, I can go to the range, and then my three options, I'm going to click on from data connection. And then you'll see that I have US states accessible. And then I'll just quickly set this up. And now that's set up. We're going to do this, we're going to do it 2 more times for example's sake. So I need to add states in the service reps. So I'm going to go back to my data connection library. You'll see that this is bolded that it's added. I'm going to add countries. Then I'm also going to add service reps. I'm going to click close. You'll notice to the right now, I've added the 2 new data connections. From here, I'm going to click on the form. I'm going to go to the countries drop-down field. I'm going to click on the range. Countries, I've already previously added it, but same process is from data connection. You choose the data connection you want to apply to the drop-down, and you set it up as you'd like. And lastly, we have service rep. Set up the label field and the value field. And now these are all set up. So now if I go to launch this form, click launch form. I have my countries and I have my states. So that's basically the data connection library in a nutshell. Again, it allows for the streamlining and sharing data connections throughout your solutions. And I think a key thing to note is you have some options on how you want to make that available. Do you want to make it available to the SharePoint site, the site collection, or the SharePoint farm? You know, it's a very powerful tool at an enterprise level, and it's definitely handy when you're developing multiple solutions at once. You know, one last thing to keep in mind, as anything else, when you're going to deploy this to other environments, so if you're going from dev to QA or QA to prod, you need to make sure that those lists or data connections, if it's a SQL database or a SharePoint list, that those already exist in those other production areas or other environments. So going back to here, that is basically our data connection library in a nutshell. My next topic is name templates. So name templates is something that I frequently get asked about on how to set up a name template for a solution. And today we're going to go over the out-of-the-box template, what's that look like. Then we're going to go into creating name templates and setting them up on the form to make it used on your process. So if I go back to my form site, I've already submitted a process, and I'm under processes tab, it's running, and this is the item. You notice that it's WEBtips 520, which is the name of my solution, and it gives the date and time. It doesn't really provide any actual indication or clarification of what this process is or what this solution is trying to accomplish. So using name templates, we can give this a better name, a more descriptive name, so that when a user's working with or on this form site, they know exactly what this solution is doing. So how we do that is on your Composer home screen under the Solution tab. If you look here to the right, there's a section called Name Templates. And what I typically like to do is you're going to right-click to add a name template. And the first thing I do when creating a name template, or if I want to, my naming convention is I always call it dash. And when I click OK, it's going to give you this name template. And what do you want it? What type of property you want it to be? Right now, by default, it's always a seed, which is a numbering system, a numbering counter rather. So I'm actually going to delete that. And then for this, it's going to be a constant. And then I do space dash space. So when we're trying to make this name for our solution, we want it to be called like WEBtips, and then have a nice space, have a dash in there, and then maybe a property within your form, the date, and a seed. But you always want to have a separation so it's not all bunched together. So that's my first name template. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a date field, or I'm going to add the date to the name template. And how you do that is similar to the dash. You're going to right-click on Name Templates. We're going to click on Add a Name Template. We're going to call this Date. We're going to remove the default option here. And then we're going to add month. And what we're trying to accomplish here is we want it to look like this. We want it to be 5-21-2020. That's what we're trying to accomplish with this. So we're going to put the month. We're going to add another property. We're going to make this a constant. We're just going to put a dash. We're going to add another name template. It's going to be day. Then we're going to add another constant. It's going to be a dash. Add another one for year. And now we have month, and you can see how it's going to be built. The month, day, year. So if I click OK here, now we have the beginning of a name template. Now how do we apply that name template to our form? So now we're going to click on the Form tab, and we're going to add a field. I'm going to go to the Form Data tab. I'm going to call this Request ID. This is the field that we're going to store that name template into. The next thing we need to do is we're going to need to add an element. And under Advanced Elements, we're going to click on Form Name. And you see that it added it up here. So this is how you're going to start building out your form name for your solution. So you've created your name template. So what we're going to do here is, for example's sake, we're just going to add over here to the right under properties, there's a template. And what template do you want to use? We're going to add, and then by default, it's solution name template. We're going to select that date for right now. So if I click OK, the next thing I need to do is define what field I'm going to add that to. And for the example's sake, we're going to choose our F request ID. And the next big thing is, when do you want this to happen? Do you want it to run it at start, or do you want to run it when the form is submitted? Typically, we always do when the form has been submitted. And that's common. If you're going to use a seed, we want to use the seed when it's been submitted. So if you're starting at 1, and then someone comes into the form and they open up the form, but they don't submit it, we don't want to lose that seed. So if you do it at the end, the next person in line will get that next seed number. So we're going to change run at to end. And then we're going to deploy this solution. So I'm going to go back to the Solution tab, and I'm going to click Deploy here. I'm going to click Launch Form. So I'm not going to fill out any information because there's nothing that really needs to be filled out. I just want to show you how the name template works. So we're just going to click on submit here. It's going to take a second here. So now you notice that the next one that I've submitted has just the date. So now we can start building on that to get a better naming convention for our solution. So we're going to go back into the composer. We're going to go back to our name template, and we're going to start building out a better name. So the next thing I would like to do is call this, say name of solution. I'm going to delete the seed. I'm going to add. I'm going to call it a constant. We're going to call it WEBtips. And click OK. And then this time we're going to actually have a seed, which again is just a number counter. We're going to click OK here because this is already a seed. So if you go in here and edit this, it's a number and it automatically will increment. So you can change the number of zeros you'd like to start at, but we're going to leave it at by default. And now we're going to go back to our form, click on the form name, template. Now we're going to start building out a better name. So the first thing I'm going to actually add here is the name of the solution. We're going to click OK. And I'm going to delete date for right now. Then I'm going to add another template. I'm going to do my dash. Then I'm going to do the date. Then I'm going to do another dash. And then I'm going to finally add the seed. Again, we're going to have this run at end. We're going to click on the solution tab, or we're going to click deploy. We're going to launch form. And we're simply just going to click submit here. So now the next one is we have our name, which is WEBtips. We have the nice dash. We have the date, and now we have the seed, which is just starting with 1. So now we're getting to a better name that's more descriptive of what's going on here. The last thing we're going to do is go over adding a field value to the name template. So I'm going to go back to my form, and we're going to click on the template. From here, I'm going to say add. We're going to choose a form field instead of a global template name. And I'm going to choose service rep. And I want service rep to be after the name of the solution, so we're going to move this up. We're actually going to add another dash. Actually, yeah. We're going to add one more dash. I'm going to move this up here, and I'm going to take my other dash and put it right here. So now we have name of the solution, dash, the name of the service rep, dash, date, dash, and the seed. So now, if we click OK here, I'll go to my solution tab. I'm going to click deploy. I'm going to launch the form. And in this one, I'm going to actually choose a service rep. I'll choose the second one. And I'm going to click submit. So now we have WEBtips, the name of the service rep, the date, and the seed. Which, when we first started off, it was just WEBtips and the date and time. So building your name template to be more descriptive will help the end user in the long run to understand what solution's going on here. So if I go to my task, you'll also see that I'll have the task name, and then you'll see the item here as well. So it starts from just a date field, and we slowly start building on this name template to make it more descriptive. So that's basically the name templates in a nutshell. You can do a lot of good things with it. You can make it as descriptive. You can make it as descriptive as you like, which makes it really easy on the end users. So we've gone through the name templates. The last and final one is the rule inspector. So a rule inspector. So we're back into our composer, and if we go to my form, go to the form data, I have a bunch of fields and I have all these rules. And just by looking at this, it's difficult to say, hey, what field is updating field 10, or what field is making this field disabled, or what are all these rules trying to accomplish? It's difficult by just out of the box you'd right click and say edit rules and view the rule. Manually you have to go through each one of these to figure out what these rules are trying to accomplish. In Winshuttle, they provided us with this. If you right click on my fields, it's called Rules Inspector. And this provides you with a snapshot of all the rules that are going on in your solution. You have the print option, so if you want to print this off, you can. You can search by certain things, and then it gives you the number of rules. We have 10 rules running on form load, which is 2. If there's any custom JavaScript, it would be noted here. But here, you can see rules running on form load. You can view these rules, and anything with an asterisk is the rules that are running on form load, which I have these 2. Now, if I wanted to say, hey, what field is setting field 7? And depending on how descriptive you made your rule names, you could just go in here and say, up here to the top right, and say, field 7. One rule popped up, and you can see that this rule is found on field 6. It's setting field 7 to test 3. Now you have the option, okay, if I wanted to modify that, I can do that. So now, if I wanted to modify this from saying test 3, I can click on the set field 7. It opens up that rule right here. I can click on edit, and I can change this to WEBtips test. So now I found the rule that was modifying field 7. I found the set value, and I was able to change the set value just in the rules inspector. So this is a very powerful tool. If depending on how descriptive you get with your names of your rules, that's key. You want to make sure you have very descriptive names for your rules, so they're easy to find and easy to distinguish what's occurring in that rule. It's also helpful of, if you had like in this instance, in this first rule, I have a validate going on. And if you're on your form and you're noticing that there's no message being prompted up, you could go here and I want to say, what's happening with that validate rule? And just by typing in validate, you'll see that I have this rule on field 5 that's saying validate field 6 for me. If I click on this, you notice that I have no message in here. So now I can provide a message saying, please validate. So this allows you to easily find your rules and provide that validation message. It's extremely helpful on larger solutions that have, this is a very small solution, but if you've got hundreds of rules, it makes finding rules and understanding where those rules are being called at that much easier. I have there's a question in the chat that's saying, can we look at the print option? So I'm gonna click on print here. And although well, for me, it's a relatively small, but it has the number of rules, form load. The only thing that's really missing is the bolding around the action rules. So you have your validation rules, your action rules, and then if there's any formatting rules, you have them right here. Right now, there's no custom rules. So this is how it looks on my end when you print the rules inspector. Now, again, for a smaller solution, this looks really good. If you have hundreds of rules, you have to you'd have to look at it, be multiple pages and stuff like that. But again, the only thing that's really missing is if I cancel out of here, is this look and feel of the bolding, or the bolding rather, and the coloring of the background. So that's the rules inspector in a nutshell. Is there any other questions around the rules inspector? Okay, there was another question around data connection library, and if you add the data connections to multiple solutions, and if it's edited later, if columns are added, does it update any other solution that it's called on? It's a great question, and this is only set up for one right now, but if I were to edit this, it's actually, let's take a step back. Let me go to this service reps. Let's add a column. Call this web tips. And then we'll click on OK. So I've added this new column to my service reps. And if I go to my data connection library, I click on service reps and I say edit. If I click on web tips, and now if I go to service reps, oh, it doesn't cached. That's it. So it doesn't automatically add it there. So I wonder though, so I've added this now, if you say sync solution, and if I go back to edit, WebTips is now added. So when you add columns to a data connection, you have to go into the data connection library, click on service reps, and then you say sync solution, and it'll sync the new columns to your solution. And now if you click on where used, you'll notice that it's being used on WebTips, on my WebTips solution. And this also provides a version of it as well. So good question. That's how you would sync up any changes to data connections. And maybe you don't, I guess there's an instance where you don't want to add new columns. You don't have to sync it then, but it definitely streamlines syncing new columns to any solution that you're working on. So that is the end of the rules inspector and going over the data connection library and how you can sync newly added columns to data connections. It's a pretty streamlined process there. I'm just going to open up any other questions or discussions you guys want to talk about today. Okay. So the next thing is reminders for the next events for Clear Process Solutions is we have our next WebTips Thursday, June 18th. If you have any ideas for WebTips or topics, send them to us. A lot of the ones that we try to accomplish are the ones that you guys want to see. So today's topics have gone over recent tickets that I've gotten from clients and stuff like that, asking, hi, how do you do this and how do you do that? So if there's things that you're stuck on, please let us know and we'll be happy to go through those in the WebTips for you guys. Lastly, all WebTips recordings can be found on our YouTube channel, so go check that out, please. And then lastly, we have our, solution care supplements for maintenance. Like this is all that we accomplish or all that we provide to our clients. And that is all. So I hope you guys had a great time today. I enjoyed going over these topics with you guys. Again, if there's anything you guys would like to learn or know more about, please let us know. We're always here to help. And if there's nothing else, any other questions, we will see you guys next month. Appreciate all you guys for coming. Bye.